afraid of dragons?
No. In fact, if it weren't for sorcerers, there wouldn't be any dragons. Once the skies were dotted with them. Magnificent horned backs, leathern wings, soaring in their hot breath wind.
Monsters have been appealing since the very first records. Dragons, for instance, in Chinese art, they stood for the benevolence and the malevolence of the forces of nature, you know, volcanoes and hurricanes. And for Dragonslayer, these myths, for lack of a better term, just don't go away. They're locked back there in one's subconscious.
That's no claw, by the gods. It's a tooth. You want me to do battle with that?
There's a lot of instinct in people that fears that face, and also maybe the entire shape. And the fact that it at times is thinking, it's not just an animal, it's like a thinking animal.
Your king's made a pact with a monster.
I love creatures and I love seeing them. That's one of the reasons I really was excited about doing Dragonslayer, was to try something different. And I mean, the whole thing different. Matthew's vision was different. Everything was like fresh.
Dragonslayer was born out of the combination of the Tolkien world and the dragons therein, plus the fact that suddenly, instead of outer space, the technology at ILM could render a creature on a level unknown prior to this. I had gone to university on the East Coast, Johns Hopkins. I majored in Romance languages and came west to go to film school to USC Cinema. Hollywood was running out of breath. That whole generation was kind of at the end. There was a shift in attitudes. It was the 60s turning into the 70s. The younger generation had, I think, different expectations as what they wanted to see and who their heroes were. Easy Rider came out and made a lot of money. So the industry was changing and doors were cracking open. When George Lucas was at USC, he asked me if I could write the screenplay for a short. And he had this idea, which he described to me in detail, which was THX 1138-4EB. In the student film world back then, that movie became a legend.
Nunc habemus lucem.
And I was very, very good friends with Hal Barwood, who was another student at USC. And the two of us talked all the time, generating story ideas without really having any plans for them, but wouldn't it be neat if, the kind of thing. And so we started thinking about writing together, and we wrote very quickly because we were full of enthusiasm and full of ideas. And it wasn't until, I think, our 6th or 7th screenplay, which was Sugarland Express, that something got made.
Magic. Magicians. It's all fading from the world. Dying out. That means the dragon will be dying too.
The origins of Dragonslayer owe to two odd things that happened to coalesce. Hal Barwood, my writing and producing partner, was a big fan of Tolkien, and he insisted that I read Lord of the Rings. And I did, and I enjoyed it very much. I was not one of the original enthusiasts, but I became an enthusiast. I thought it was wonderful and got carried away by it. And at the same time, George Lucas was creating Industrial Light and Magic. And Hal and I were around a lot. This was when it was in Van Nuys, and he had a warehouse that he was renting with John Dykstra was going to be heading it up. And we went and visited there, and we were witness to a lot of the creation of Industrial Light and Magic. And we got excited by the idea of taking ILM and moving it out of those star fields and ships and putting it into another domain. And so we hatched this story. And unbeknownst to us, the studios had identified the phenomena of this Dungeons and Dragons craze that was going wild in the early 80s. I had never and have still never played that game, but we learned when we finished the screenplay and the agency sent the script out with Hal producing and Matthew directing, there was interest from Paramount and also from Disney. And in both cases, they had been trying to develop stories based on dragons because of the Dungeons and Dragons craze. And then the agents called us to say that it's going to be a co-production of both studios, and Paramount would do distribution in the US and Canada and Disney the rest of the world. And so that's how the movie found its footing.
Not a bit too heavy. I'll conquer the highest mountain.
If you say so, sir.
Disney was concerned about the fact that it was set in England and there would be English accents, and they were all about Americana. And at Disney's insistence, actually, the cast had to include a number of Americans, including American leads, hence Peter MacNicol.
It is the duty of those who hold the power to protect those who are weak-kneed.
Weak and in need.
Weak and in need. And for...
Enough. You don't understand.
Peter MacNicol just seemed ideal for this very young adult in terms of who he was and what his ambition was.
I'm Galen Brad Warden, inheritor of Ulrich's craft and knowledge. And I am the sorcerer you seek.
He seemed to be able to not only embody the juvenile sorcerer's apprentice, but also in the second half of the film where things get very serious, to kind of gather himself up and grow up into the role of a hero. That was a big factor. Also the fact that in his speech, he had a mid-Atlantic sound, and I had no worries at all about him in scenes with great English actors like Peter Eyre and Ian McDiarmid.
What are you saying? You want the dragon back?
You came here and toyed with a monster. Who are you to risk our people? Our villages.
But your children were dying.
Only a few. Does that sound cruel?
That was not an issue, and it had been a big worry of mine. And eventually, when I found Peter and Caitlin, that worry went away.
Welcome to Cragganmore. I'm Ulrich. Which of you men calls himself Valerian?
That would be me. We're here on behalf...
I know why you're here.
Caitlin Clark, she had not only an interesting look as the young, boyish beauty, but again, the way she carried herself, you could believe that she had been disguised as a boy all during her early adolescence.
That thing isn't a loon. There's little ones. Young, I think. I don't know how many.
And we enhanced that in the way we treated her in the sound mix, and we pitched her down a little bit.
What are you doing? Don't come in! How's the water?
I prefer to swim alone, if you don't mind.
Until it was revealed that this lad was a lass. And then we just stopped in the mix. We took out that filter.
You'll be ripped limb from limb. This is the last time I'll ever speak to you.
So that she had a normal speaking voice. I don't think people would be literally aware of it, but it would help sell that point.
We have visitors.
I will see them.
You will?
Yes. There's a great task needing to be done.
What I liked about Sir Ralph was the very, to my eye anyway, visible eccentricity. That he had a very unusual manner.
All this magic, what has it accomplished?
There is some strange quality that he has. There is the charisma, but there is also this sort of alien presence. I was intrigued by him, having been exposed to his work in many of the famous films that he had made as a younger man. And he didn't have a lazy eye. It wasn't off to one side, but he had an odd way of looking, which was canny. And for the part of Ulrich, sort of unworldly. It was just his presence.
Master?
No. They'd think me infirm.
And he was very much the same way when not on stage, just in his manner with you. He was a fascinating man. He had a wicked sense of humor, and to take direction from an American whippersnapper. In the beginning, he really wanted to see if I knew my stuff. In our table readings, when we were rehearsing, he was writing and making notes, and he would challenge, why this word and not that word, and are you sure? You know, and put me through something of a test.
Go on. Don't worry. You can't hurt me.
It was more of who are these young fellows, Hal Barwood and Matthew Robbins here with this project. His friend Alec Guinness had done Star Wars with similarly untested film students who had come over, Gary Kurtz and George Lucas, and he had heard about that. And here he was going through the same thing with us. But the truth is, I just was so impressed by what he was doing, and I think it must have been written all over my face. The dailies were wonderful. He was so compelling. We formed a friendship, and that's one of my fond memories of Dragonslayer, is the time that I spent with him. He was really a lovely man.
All you think about is your tricks and your knavery. You'll have to walk a long way before you fill his shoes. You mark my words.
Hal and I were great fans of Fantasia, and the Mickey Mouse character who puts on the robes of the magician and loses control of the magic with the brooms. It's a big element of that running through our story. That's almost exactly what happens in the first half of that film, which is he's too big for his britches, and he gets carried away with his magical powers. It's all working. He can do these tricks, and he entertains himself, and he's the big man.
My Lord Ulrich is no longer. All that you asked of him, you may now expect of me.
The studio was worried about us. Maybe we were very much the apprentice filmmakers in their eyes.
The task he would undertake, I will now fulfill.
And so Paramount put Howard W. Koch on to be a producer with Hal Barwood. And Howard was a seasoned veteran with many, many years in all areas of the business, and a wonderful man. Was a grandfather to us. And he had been president of the studio here. I mean, this was his lot. And so they had a lot of confidence in him. And he had never made a film with anything like the technical demands of our film. And he was, in the nicest possible way, bewildered by these technical conversations about these elements and these plates and these blue screen shots and all the rest of it. But he was very reassuring to the studio people back here, and he protected us. I mean, the studio was seeing just bits and pieces here and there, the typical effects film. In those days, this was a lot of new territory, so he was reassuring, saying, don't worry, the guys are getting through the day. He was just a tremendous asset.
Listen to me. You're not going to die.
Both Hal and I had an instinct to reject films in which magic was overly available, where a magical solution could be at hand. And I understand that the principle that I'm describing is the real world. In that case of Dragonslayer, a gritty world.
But isn't it strange that the very moment that the beast was put down, there should be a holy man in the village?
With the arrival of Christianity, a certain historical moment being identified in terms of the year 600 or 700, somewhere in Northern Europe, who knows where. But into that world, you drop one fantastical element. You make everybody respond to it as honestly as possible. And I just think it just generates a lot of entertainment, for one thing, but also you get into what people are made of, which is where all the drama lies.
When a dragon gets this old, it knows nothing but pain, constant pain. It grows decrepit, crippled, pitiful, spiteful.
Matt, was insistent that the dragon, be old and crotchety and was in a great deal of pain, because it was, 1,000 years old.
The implication is that it's the last dragon, the end of a kind of fabulous tradition, storytelling, and humanity believing in things like that. And the bittersweet fact that a great part of the human imagination was being set aside.
If we but join together in faith.
With the arrival of a different mentality, Christian mentality.
And the beast shall die.
Arise, children of the Lord. Forsake forevermore the pagan mysteries.
The irony it's kind of evident, I guess, in the film is that Ulrich himself is the last of his kind.
I have been witness to something of consequence to you, my own death.
It's the end of the mage, the magical presence, bidding farewell to humanity because you're now interested in other things, where these are the forgotten gods of another consciousness. And so we were aware of that. So there's a kind of crazy kinship between the sorcerer and the last dragon. The two of them disappeared. Elliot Scott was the production designer, and he had educated a whole generation of production designers, and I learned a lot from working with him. When I first arrived in England and we began looking to put the unit together, and nobody was available. There was a lot of production going on, and everyone said, well, why don't you go to Scotty? Go to Scotty. Scotty's the one. And so I met him, and I think it's one of the best things in the movie is what he delivered for production design. He pointed out to me that in the 235 format, that a lot of the production was going to be lost, be out of frame. And so he just instinctively had the absolutely sensible idea to take the ceiling heights down and to slant them. And so a lot of the caves, if you look at the film, there are these passageways which are able to be seen. And that design element ran through a lot of the sets that he made in the interior of Ulrich's castle and the rest of it. He knew where to put the money. He knew, if you look at the lighting of where the light's coming up through the floor, that the architectural elements were not only unusual, but available. They were there. It was, and you didn't have to reach for them. He just gave you, in every single way, there were opportunities everywhere. This is true of every set. Everything that I wanted was designed out of his shop. The amulet, the spear, the shield, it was all just done to perfection. And the wood carving, he had an actual wood carver make those elements on the carts and on those dragon symbols. And he understood forced perspective. And in the big crowd scenes where they're doing the lottery, drawing the name of the next victim.
And my name is.
That's a forced perspective set. It looks much bigger than it really was. Derek Van Lint, he is a primary reason the film looks as good as he was a wonderful cameraman. And I learned a lot from him as well. I was new, I was young and I needed to operate certain very big scenes with more than one camera, which I had done very, very little prior to that. And I had to be very careful with Derek because he had his lighting scheme and I couldn't just cheerfully go and put a camera just anywhere once the lighting scheme was set up. I learned how to work with him in that regard when we had these big things to do. It allowed us to speed up as we went along. I was kind of going to a film school still, I guess, in a way.
They called him the Prince of Darkness, as well as Gordon Will as the Prince of Darkness. I don't know who the original Prince of Darkness is, but Derek was really keeping it down to keeping it moody, and I needed to keep that in my stuff. We kept the color scape kind of the same and everything. But I did add something to it that I started then, and I did it a lot in E.T. and all sorts of shows I've done since, that I call peekaboo, and that is to light things, they're somewhat selectively, but don't have them totally lit at all. Make it look like this thing's 50 feet long, and I've got to take 4 lights from the right to light it, and it's going to take 3 up above, but I can't light this area over here. And then when it moves through it, it's revealing, and something's disappearing, and that's revealing. So the shot, as it plays out, has got curiosity to it. All the time, it's changing. The character's changing. Now, you're looking at his head. You're following, his attitude. But you're always looking at, look at that. Oh, my God, I see a foot now. I didn't see before. So it's like a good noir movie, where you play with darks and shadows.
Looks forbidding enough, don't you think?
Oh, yes.
And the costume design, Anthony Mendelsohn, he was a very, very talented veteran of the British film industry. I was very lucky that he was available. And he worked with Sir Ralph, and Sir Ralph had a lot of growing confidence in us because he got to work with 2 of the people. He was very aware of who they were. And we had Bruce Nicholson, who was doing the matte photography. In the world of matte photography, he is one of those legends. He was very important. He designed a lot of techniques that made properly done matte photography as convincing as it can be. It's very hard to say that to audiences today because the original transfers to VHS and DVD didn't capture that at all. On the big screen, Bruce Nicholson's work was really impeccable.
Scales. I found them at the mouth of the lair.
Oh, I know this creature of yours. Vermithrax pejorative.
Vermithrax is the worm of Thrace, and pejorative just was fun because it was so badass, that it formed the personality of the worm of Thrace. I mean, we didn't come from the world of entertainment, we came from the world of scholarship, and literary, philosophical, religious elements were just available to us because of who we were, and we weren't trying to make a point, really. But Vermithrax pejorative was fun and playful enough for people who would listen carefully and take it on board.
Vermithrax.
Unclean beast, get thee down!
David Bennett, the late, great illustrator, was somebody we knew in Northern California. He was a very talented artist, typographer. He designed the logo, the typography of Dragonslayer, which is now everywhere. He created that font. He was a wonderful artist, and he designed the dragon.
Dave couldn't figure out, apparently, what to do, how to break what that dragon design should be, and he said he got an idea watching TV or something, and he sort of put a spine through it, and he made that snout really strong and the brow strong. You look at his early design, sketch of it, and it's like, that's it. And an interesting thing was that if you look at Dave in a profile, he's got that forehead and he's got that nose kind of like that. That initial shape is Dave Bennett's face.
Those eyes, David had big blue eyes, very prominent, and prominent jaw. Without that much morphing, you could turn him into Vermithrax. It always amused me, and used to tease him about it.
You still wish to be a sorcerer?
Oh, yes, more than anything.
Well, then, Adaptus Nino. Get yourself a handful of that sulfurous ash over there.
Matt Robbins and Hal Barwood, the producer and the director, were friends of George's and worked on his and Stephen's movies. So this was their next big movie, so that's where we met.
With Dennis Muren and ILM, I had a very, very solid team. There was no shopping for effect. In fact, in those days, there was no rival. ILM stood alone. There was just nothing comparable.
Well, we had just moved up from LA for Empire Strikes Back, and so we were like 2 years, a year and a half into it, when we were wondering what's going to happen after this. Is George going to make a third Star Wars film? Somehow somebody said, well, can we fill this time slot in? And I guess Matthew Robbins and all kind of knew George and said, well, maybe here's a project we can bring here. And Stephen was interested in stuff, and Raiders, was floating out around there. So it seemed to be a way to keep the company open until George decided if he was going to do another Star Wars film. And it was pretty neat. There was a chance to actually do a kind of Harryhausen kind of character with this dragon. We all just sort of jumped at it.
So I took Dave Bennett's drawings and then, had to kind of refurbish them. I mean, he had the idea based on what, Matt wanted. So I just redeveloped that. I looked at a lot of footage of Komodo dragons and went to the zoo and checked them out because that was the closest thing I could find. Also, looking at the bones of a pterodactyl, that pretty much shows you what it is and how they operate. And like on Empire, I just collected volumes of notes. Spent all the pre-production period just studying footfall patterns, projecting an intentionality through the character, where we creatures take everything in through our eyes and then process it in our minds and then use our eyes to determine what our next move is.
The other thing about the dragon is that Hal, who had a lot of views, Hal Barwood, he still has a lot of views about a lot of things, but the dragon, that it should not be four-legged. It should not be a reptile with wings added. That it should be bat-like wings, which has, of course, become the cliche, but that it would have to somehow crawl through the underworld on those very same wings, which would be really weird, and Phil totally captured that.
He wanted it to appear physiologically like a real animal, not something that had, 4 legs and then wings.
We started out with, first of all, how are we going to get the dragon stuff really working? And that, of course, was Phil and Ken Ralston, who was a great sculptor, animator also, puppeteer, and that team between those guys were going to be able at ILM to do it. Our part of it. And as we geared up, we decided we're going to do stop motion, which was going to require an armature, and Tom Sanamon, the great armature builder, he was involved.
This was very much the ILM process. They divided up the labor, who was going to do what. By that time, I was casting and attending to everything else. They asked for the boards. I did the storyboards with David Burnett, and then they took the boards, and with their effects producer, they broke the boards down, who was responsible for which element.
Once the design was locked down, what I would do is over the articulated skeleton, that looks like this, that allows us to move everything one frame at a time, I sculpted a musculature. And then my approach was, I read up a lot on taxidermy, and I would make these skins. And it was very important to get the scale right. And so I found shot from like bird shot that was like very tiny, and would tamp them into clay, make a mold of that, and put colored latex into that. And then I would use paper glue to glue that on to the substructure, the foam latex, and I would be very careful to put wrinkles in it. Danny Lee, who was like this old-time Disney special effects guy, it was really great working with those old guys, was in charge of the articulation of the live-action full-scale dragon, head and neck, wing, foot. Then that got shipped off to England, and my job there was to paint it, and I was using these new approaches with paint. It was actually very elaborate. You had to do it in stages. So there I was, just by myself. And then the engineers that were rigging the mechanics for how the neck would move, we would go out to lunch together, go to the pub. And we came back shit-faced, and there they all were, Matt and Hal, and they wanted a demonstration of the head. And I was like, and this thing could kill you. It was like 20 feet long or whatever, and it could move like this. And I just, I'm not going to be here. I just had to walk away.
The full-scale pieces, which is held up on cables and move on cranes, and very, very heavy, very clumsy, but with the reality of when the actor has to jump on the back of the neck of the creature, he's jumping on the back of the creature. He really did it. So all the interaction is as good as you can get it using real elements, as long as the guys controlling it understand what you want, and you understand what the limitations are. So there's that. That's level one. Level 2 was sort of a mid-sized dragon, a hand puppet. Chris Wayless was given the task of a highly detailed dragon head and neck. And he put it on his arm, like Kukla, Fran, and Ollie puppetry, that kind of thing. And it was a beautiful, beautiful piece. And it's got its own size and scale. I think that might have been used for the shot where it looms up in frame, because you could stand that kind of close-up attention to it. It had that kind of detail on it. Properly lit, it looked really scary. And then 3 was the go motion puppet. What is go motion for people who don't know? I guess that's today already an as antique as stop motion. It was the idea that the creature would move during the exposure of the frame. They had done a little bit of what they called go motion in Empire Strikes Back, and they were so excited about that because it was a revolution in that world, and it was going to be put into practice for a much more ambitious, in a full-scale way for the animation of the dragon.
Stop motion is when you have a figure, and we have these elaborate stop-motion puppets with armatures that you can move into any position when you let it go and stay in that position. And you shoot one frame of film, and an animator can then move it to a new position, and you shoot another frame of film, and 24 of those give you 1 second of film.
It's very laborious. You have to be really understanding of choreography and movement and acting to communicate through the language of the creature. But when you see it, every frame is sharp. It's traditional stop motion, King Kong, Ray Harryhausen, and all the rest of the famous stop motion movies, all the Sinbad movies, everything is in focus in terms of movement. And when you look at most motion pictures, you move rapidly and the extremities are blurred. And that phenomena is what gives fluidity and a different look to live action as opposed to stop motion. Go motion was somebody very clever in Phil's world, came up with the idea of what if we find a way to expose the frame while it's moving.
When I was visiting Dennis and Ken, they were on the night crew for Star Wars, and I saw the motion control equipment and realized, animators have been trying to put motion blur on characters, and it just was not that successful, and it was very laborious. And so as soon as we got to relocated up in San Rafael for Empire, Ken Ralston and I shot a test, different shutter levels and whatnot, and got it back in dailies the next day. But it worked. It eliminated just that one axis, the chatter.
And we've been thinking about this for years, because Phil and I and Ken are all real good friends, and we've studied it. And I was just saying, let's don't do stop motion. I mean, we love it, but we've seen it. My feeling was, after Empire Strikes Back, effects that look like effects had a ceiling for people that are going to enjoy the movie. And at some point, it's like, oh, it's effects. These movies were so expensive, it had to break that. It had to get some point where you're going to look at it and you're going to say, you know, I don't know how this was done. I want to see it again. Or it was so real or whatever that it's not just looking like a film that was made in the 70s or anything like that. It had to go somewhere else. What I was thinking of, because the Star Wars stuff was so hard to do with the spaceships, was maybe rod puppets with great puppeteers and the whole setup rig for the guys. But you think about it, there's no way you're going to get 6 or 8 puppeteers, you know, to work in sync. That had been tried before and never quite looks right. And Phil just said, well, let's just get all the stuff and put it together and build a rig to move it. And I said, this is going to be hell, Phil. We had enough trouble, you know, with moving 4 axes on the spaceship and 3 axes on the camera. And he said, well, we got to do it. And so, okay, let's go for it. So we got Gary Leo in with an Apple II computer, and he knew how to program it to build a whole system to be able to drive the motors and everything.
They took stepping motors and hooked them up to the creature, and then a computer, wow, computers, right, would learn these motions, and then you put that into these stepping motors and you begin to shoot, and the shutter opens and the motion happens. And so the resulting film looks very different. It's a graceful, convincing look.
The dragon was maybe like 3.5 feet long from snout to tail, and the body was about like this. And off each leg or each wing point, in some cases, there would be a rod attached to it, and that rod is going to a motor down below that could go in at least 2 directions and could also maybe have a 3rd direction to it. And if the joints were loose, you could make the thing go kind of anywhere you wanted. So with that, you could get rid of the hand movement every single frame and have the computer play it back. And because when it's recorded at a continuous motion. So what it does is it takes the jumps out of the stop motion. The Dragon movers, we call the Go Motion rig, I think was pretty much put together by Stewart, but we had put together stuff for Empire and for even back for Star Wars. They were essentially the same sort of thing, but this had multiple pieces, and everything had to be movable also. I mean, there was a limitation on how long the tracks could be. So without them running into each other, you know, so the whole base of each foot needed to be reconfigured in some way or another, and probably the vertical on each foot, how much it could go up and down, had to be reconfigured. So it was a job getting that all set up.
My main task was the walking dragon, the big one. Its wingspan was 6 feet. It was huge. And those were the scenes I shot in the cave. And then Ken Ralston and Tom Sanamon, they were simultaneously shooting all the flying dragon material while I was doing the walking dragon.
The Go Motion system did not handle everything. There was still a lot of handwork that Phil was doing on the neck and head and the wings and all that had to be done. So it was always one frame and then Phil would go in.
Dragonslayer is the same approach that I used on Empire. And on Empire was not at the skill level I needed to be. I felt. Everybody else thought it was okay, and it was like, nah. And so Dennis Muren had found the very first reel-to-reel tape stop-motion devices.
We managed to track down one of the first, if not the first, solid-state digital black and white recorders, so we could shoot one frame at a time and then play back, 48 frames and then run it back to the beginning so we could check the animation. You could actually check the work compared to what you had done 15 minutes ago and by actually running it, frame at a time or 24 frames and forward about whatever it is, and Phil could go in and fix the pops here and there, and Matthew would have a comment and say, fix this and fix that. So it was a great way of reviewing without committing. There's still a million things that would go wrong in dailies, but you knew you had fundamental performance.
Between other tasks, I would just went in there and animated 6 hours, 8 hours a day until it was the urban myth of the 10,000 hours. You have to put in 10,000 hours before you get to the other side of this curve, and then it just happens. And that has to do a lot with muscle memory. It just takes a while for that stuff to burn in.
Some shots that we did might take Phil, I don't know, a week and a half to program, something like that. And it was very time-consuming. But you got it on film, and it's like, I've never seen anything like it. It's like, I always thought that this is what you imagine a stop-motion thing could look like. And it doesn't look like boring anymore, or like a documentary, because the designs are so fabulous, but you're seeing it with less artifacts, so it's closer and closer to your soul and terror and reality and awe and all that sort of stuff. We invited Ray Harryhausen to come over at one time. He was in the area and came by and took a look at it. And he's always been a very gracious guy, always secretive. And we just sort of opened up the place for what we were doing and wanted to get his feedback. And we're very proud of the design and putting together this machine and the whole mentality of Star Wars and Close Encounters and that whole era of moving forward with it, putting it onto something that he knew, which is stop-mo, and saying, can we apply new thinking and money to what you were doing? And the result was, holy mackerels, the amazing dragon. He couldn't deny that the work was like pretty extraordinary. We were just very happy we got through it. And it was so hard at the end. The slogan we had was "No Mo Gomo." And yet we pulled it out again a little bit for Jedi. But Dragonslayer was the hardest we ever had to do.
Still alive.
This is Sicarius Draconum, Dragonslayer. The best I ever made. It's beautiful, but I never had the nerve to use it.
I really wanted a good-looking spear and got one. I've been asked about that spear by collectors. I actually think I have it at home. The manufacturing of that spear, that was Elliot Scott. He had a guy, a wood carver, a single person who carved all the decorative heads. And they made it, and I said I need it so that it can cut lead. And they manufactured that so it could happen.
Stay away!
They made the pond where she swims. They created a pond on the lot at Pinewood that was in an actual forest right adjacent to the studio. There is a moment at that pond, after the young people have been swimming, where they're coming out, there's a strange moment where he realizes something bad has happened. And there's a silence in the forest, and the camera drifts over the lake. And we did 3 takes, but I didn't use the best take. I used the second best take because at the beginning of the camera move, it was a boom shot. The camera comes down over the lake. A dragonfly flies in front of the lens and then shoots away. I deliberately used that take because a dragonfly coming into our movie, volunteering itself, hey, I heard you need dragons, here I am, right? Showing up for that shot was just so extraordinary.
Now be it known throughout the kingdom that this maiden, having lawfully been chosen by a deed of fortune and destiny, shall hereby give up her life for the greater good of our land.
The most difficult part of the process was a full-scale dragon. And we were trying to be judicious because the manipulation of something of that size was very, very difficult. We're talking about heavy, heavy pieces on steel cable, which had to be disguised. Could not digitally paint out anything. So the sequence in the film where the virgin maiden is chained for sacrifice and this creature is coming up out of the steamy depths of the underworld cave, that was designed to be done with those full-scale pieces where she would interact. And I had designed a sequence in which the dragon was playing with her the way a cat plays with a mouse. And so the full-scale dragon claw was meant to gather her in and send her over here, and then the tail would curl and bring her back around here, and it was choreographed in the storyboards, and nothing worked.
It was built, I think, very quickly, and it didn't do all the stuff that Matthew wanted it to do, which happens all the time. That stuff is beyond the capability of what the tools were at that time. Eventually, when we got to Jurassic, that group managed to get it to be, with a lot of testing, months and months in advance, managed to get the stuff to work really well. But in this one, it was sort of like the 20-foot-long full-size dragon head and neck that was made isn't going to cut it.
I still get goosebumps thinking about it because I had a big company. It was the so-called Bond stage at Pinewood. It was this enormous set with live animals and this young actress and her chains, and they were looking at me, as they would, what do you want to do? And I just started cooking up stuff. Okay, maybe we could, put it up there and just drop it on this card. Okay, well, let's try that. And this was not like an improv test day. This was the actual full company shooting. And every day of production cost a lot of money. We were making it up as we went along. And the fact that it all cut together and made sense with the music and the effects was like one of those flop sweat stories.
It was sort of like, there's going to be more of our stuff that we need. If it worked, then there wouldn't be an ILM. And it may have been Chris, or I don't know who, was saying, let's do a hand puppet. Or try it like that. So we made something together and shot it, and it looked pretty good. We could get the shots. And he did some design changes, I think, in the face also. He sort of dramatized it more and brought pulsing going on, totally fictitious. The brow goes up and down, totally fictitious. The tongue and all this stuff. He said, let's put them in here and make them available if they help the shot. And so that's what we did. Got a lot of shots. I don't know, of the close-up shots, 3/4 of them at least are this hand puppet, And that really helped an awful lot to be able to get angles, shoot them quickly. We got, all the approaching the baby dragons and everything. We're done with that, an awful lot of them.
I was quite worried about the baby dragons, and I tyrannized Phil about the design. He wanted something that he could animate. My worry was that baby dragons would be cute, and people would just hate the idea that they get beheaded and stabbed and, And he brought me a number of designs, and I was so paranoid. I drove him crazy, and he drove me crazy about the design of those baby dragons, until finally he said, all right, they're not cute. And of course, they were not cute. They were loathsome.
Someone hit on the idea, the problem is the eyes. They had baby big eyes, so right away they looked like cute little babies. So I think they squished them all up like they were, glued together and too small or something, so you didn't feel a connection, positive connection to them, and that helped a lot. So when you saw them, you knew, these are bad. They have a great sense of weight also. I mean, that whole show, when you look at animal sculpts, there was a sense of weight to everything. And one of the dangers that's going on now, in the CG world is there's no sense of weight.
And I also have to confess to the fact that I was not aware when I was shooting it that I was turning stomachs with a number of those shots of the princess being devoured. It never occurred to me. I never had a second thought about doing that. And it wasn't until we had previews that I suddenly became aware of it. Oh God, people are really, revolted. The reality of it might have been more than I bargained for. Shooting the Lake of Fire, it was not easy to work there, but we only found out like a day or two before that when they put everything on at once, it would spread and lay across the surface of the lake and then would spread in that fashion. We didn't know what we were going to get, and I was delighted with it. And then there were actually columns of flame that appeared. I don't think anybody had banked on that. And we were very, very lucky that we didn't burn the place down, because it was really pretty massive. Those are 10-foot tall columns of flame. It was very warm, and it wasn't easy to light for Derek. Yet it cut together so well. Another thing I can say about the Lake of Fire and the attendant caves and corridors around it was not very big. It was not nearly as big as you think it is. It was just, again, his design made it easy to lay it out so that in continuity you had the feeling that you were much deeper underground.
In Dragonslayer, one of the things that we found out pretty quick on was, where's the soul of the dragon? Where is it? He couldn't see it. Well, it was missing eyelights. In the face, it was just kind of like dark, and there was the brow and all that sort of thing. And it may have been Phil that said, it needs eyelights. How about ball bearings? So we got little tiny ball bearings that put them in there. You can't tell that they're silver. All you see is the glint. but it's the soul of the character, and that made such a difference.
Inserting, the emotional arc, you really don't have to do that much, So the dragon walks in and sees her babies and like, oh, my baby. And then you're looking for little kind of signature things to articulate its mental expression. And so the dragon had designed into it these gills. Those I had to animate, like some of the shots on the Imperial Snowwalkers, with movements that you couldn't see. They were so infinitesimal, you just had to feel them. So once that scene had been established, you had like a key to the character, and that sorrow leads to anger, and then anger drives the rest. And one of the iconic shots was after the dragon had seen that her babies had been slaughtered. In the next cut, you just see like an empty cave. And you hear this bum, 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 bum. And then you see this thing like, coming out. And as a result of having like all of these rods on each of the legs and the body, Dave Carson had to build a mock-up with a foam core set. And what we had to do was run the performance through, and he had to like cut slots in the surface of the ground. Then that was a template to put it into plywood or whatever.
Dave Carson designed the sets. I had him do sort of lay it out as a blueprint, like an architect would lay it out. So from the front, it looked like a finished cave. You can use your imagination, but you look at it from the side, and it was made up of flats and areas and sculpts so Phil could get in and do it. That just proved to be really time-consuming.
Dennis was very careful. We put black velvet on the attachment rods. And then Dennis' task was to very carefully make sure that the lighting was such that you could not see those.
The goal was to shoot the whole thing without blue screen, because I wanted to really be able to go in and tweak everything. Blue screen often could have some artifacts with the black level and stuff like that. And as we got into it, it became harder and harder to hide the rods. And we could see, we was finding the ones going down, but we couldn't put rods on the neck and head, because if we put one on the neck, or two on the head and neck, you would have seen them. And that ended up being all stop motion that Phil would do. And that's part of one of the reasons we said we've got to put rods on the head and neck also, because it looked stop motion-y. And it just seemed like this is getting too hard to do this in there. It was hard for Phil to get in to animate, so we had to go to blue screen, still with the go motion process, and then combined in optical, and that came out pretty great. When Galen jumps on the back of the dragon, that was a huge shoot in England. It had scale, and it showed the dragon off really well, and that was probably one of the main reasons that head was built, because there had to be real contact. For us, it was just another shot. I mean, we could come up with cool angles. We had the fire effects going on it.
I built a scale Galen that was about this big, and Tom Sanneman had fabricated this beautiful armature, this little tiny, human armature. And so Galen was all stop motion, and then we hooked up stepper motors to, the neck somehow, and then that rod gets rotated out, and that shot had to be shot against blue screen. So that allowed for the motion blur.
It really showed off the go motion, the blurring being accurate, because the thing is thrashing to the left and to the right.
On some of the shots, we took the taking camera off the tripod, and I put a Polaroid up there, and I just kind of ran through and blocked the movements that way, and took shots every 6 frames. And then I had a flip book. And so I could go back and forth and refine the process that way, so we didn't waste a lot of time doing a bunch of takes.
In the setups where we did of the dragon actually walking in the cave set and everything, I used bridal veil, which is what brides used to often wear, translucent, and you can hang it up tight. And it's white, but you have no lights on it. You can't see it, but it fogs a little bit. You put a little light on it, and it looks like smoke that's in the air. And I'd have 2 or 3 layers of those, sometimes even slightly in front of the camera, selectively, but actually within the set, maybe between the dragon and the set behind it or in front of it. And it makes it harder to see it, which is a really good thing. I think that's one of the things that's appealing to it. You got the design that's phenomenal. You got the performance of it. You got the fact that half the body's covered by these big wings, like it's trying to navigate the situation. And then you've got the peekaboo lighting, and I think the fact that you've got this haze, I think all those are adding up into this emotional response you get when you see those shots in the show.
act while life is still in me.
The most problematic area of the film was the last 15 minutes from the eclipse.
It was not just the dragon. The show had this whole 10-minute ending, actors in front of a blue screen with a stormy background, and we had Rick Victor. He did a lot of the background shooting of the clouds. You know, he went over to Hawaii. I've had him over there for like 3 weeks, jetting around and driving from one island to another, wherever the clouds were. So we got a lot of good cloud footage.
Sir Ralph out there, he was very, very uncertain of what was happening. He had never done anything like that. He had a sardonic personality, and when I would say this, that, and the other is going to come from here and there and there, and he would look at me like, you know, dear boy, are you serious? You want me to look where? And this kind of thing. And so that was not easy. And in those last 15 minutes of the movie, we're dealing with elements that were almost entirely manufactured. And today, there's so much going on in the world of CG where you have no idea if there's even a single photographic element there. Nobody even thinks about it. But when I look at what I was asking for back then against a blue screen with very little else, and then the way the background was meant to combine, and I think that we pulled it off just.
But at that time, movies were ending like that. You know, they were getting into a big spectacle. At the end, this was going to be a big spectacle. Except we had the dragon flying around to add to it instead of UFOs and things. So it was a lot of stuff to keep track of in addition to probably, I don't know how many of the four-legged dragon walking shots there were, but there were probably 40 or 50 of these flying dragon shots that Ken Ralston did the animation. Tom Sanamon came in at the end, did some of the animation on the flying dragons also.
Another thing that I was very worried about, maybe unnecessarily, overly, was the look of a flying dragon. I was worried that this kind of movement would not be menacing. I felt that outstretched wings gliding was most like an attack fighter plane. And so I wouldn't let Ken Ralston and Phil and those guys do a lot of wing flapping. Maybe, I almost regret that in a way, because I think they could have sold it. But it's where, you know, what's in there is not bad.
We did build the armature for the wings to be go motioned during it, and it is in a few of the shots.
I made like 2 flying dragons that were about this big. And then my friend Stuart Ziff, he engineered this, it was like a clock inside the armature that had these worm gears, and that went to a flexible cable that was attached to a stepper motor so that Ken could program the wings and get a motion blur.
So as the shutters open and all the regulars are moving, the wings are getting all the right blurs and everything. But after that, Matthew really wanted that speed at the end to keep it dramatic and keep the threat going, you know. And maybe, you know, I'm seeing the shows that have been done since, a lot of the stuff on TV with all the wings flapping to try to show it lifting, and it doesn't quite look right, you know. It still doesn't look like that weight could be lifted. You know, I don't know if it's the right call to have the moving, the flapping wings also. It may be something you want to get rid of, you know, and get the guy in the sky off camera as fast as you can, and then play it all with the dive bomb. In my memory, it wasn't that different than flying the spaceships. I mean, you had to have the sense of gliding and all that and power. But as far as getting the motions through the frame, you know, Ken was a whiz on that. It was just hard to keep those shots dynamic. They often worked on Star Wars because there would be 6 spaceships flying through or something. But with one character going through, I remember struggling with that, you know, and seeing kind of one shot after another, and they kind of looked the same, and there wasn't much more that we could do with the performance. I mean, because that's what we wanted, was this, not a fighter jet, but a really fastest gliding 4-ton dragon. But I think the guys did a great job on it.
One of the great things about Ralston is that generation of effects people is that they were sensitive to acting. The dramatic moment is not just a question of how good does it look and how convincing is it, but they also understood there's intention here, and Ralston just was delivering shot after shot with reality, but also malign villainy. Tony Lawson, the film editor, he was a great, great ally of mine. He was English, and he brought an English assistant with him. He worked in Northern California, and we worked on flatbed, but we also had a moviola in the room. And Tony was a very sophisticated storyteller, and the film moves It's not rushed. The story is always ahead of you, and I think that's one of his gifts. He was very, very talented at that. He made me cut a lot of things. He was ruthless. He showed me things. I would come in and he would have things available that I had never planned. I want to show you something. And you really have to be honest at moments like that and say, oh my God, even though it was raining and we were all suffering and we were freezing and we get that, but you've taken it out. He would say, yes, but look what we can do there. And the rule that I learned from him is that if it can go, it will go. Those discoveries which are made in the editing room are about the elimination of those jewels and gems that you treasure so much, but kill your darlings. And Tony Lawson was a master of that.
A king must protect his people.
Just as he protects his daughter.
And Walter Murch, of course, being the godfather of that whole tradition of sound design at a whole new level of storytelling. And so the idea of very ambitious sound design, the term that he, Walter, created, was just an assumption. There was no question we were going to be using all the very best people out of Northern California to create our soundtrack. And he made me aware of the importance of atmospheric sound effects, and so there'd be a change in tonality when you went from one forest to another. But we had a very, very big orchestral score. We had a lot of various voice tracks to do, which combined retakes and voice replacements and all the usual nonsense that goes on with dialogue track, plus a very, very highly detailed set of Foley tracks and atmospheric tracks.
This is Lucifer!
Dear Father, we beseech thee.
And the first day of the mix was very, very disturbing. It was a fight between every element. I was very, very worried. And I asked Walter to please come help us. And he did. He took control of the board with Mark Berger, the other mixer, another wonderful, talented mixer. But Walter, he just knew where to put the emphasis, and he had no compunctions about throwing things out to clarify. He just had a lot of confidence to do that. It wasn't a question of honoring this work, because a lot of the team were waiting to hear their results. It's very highly detailed work. He was like an orchestra conductor. He managed to pull together these elements and clarify them, and that's what you're hearing, and it's exceptional. Alex North. I admired his work from seeing his films, and I had a few conversations with Alex, and eventually I think met him in New York, and we really got along very well because I wanted a modernist score. I even played him segments of various symphonies by Prokofiev, and his favorite composer, as it turned out, is Prokofiev. So that was the beginning of our collaboration. And I was really fascinated by his process. He was being very ambitious with his score in atonality. I think it's a very, very effective score. And I learned from collectors and aficionados of film music who knew about the score that had not been used for 2001, that Alex had cheerfully gone back to segments of the score that he had written for Stanley Kubrick that had gotten thrown out. Well, I don't find this scandalous at all, because Stanley Kubrick had another idea for his 2001, and Alex North never really got over the fact that he had fully scored the film and was devastated when Stanley Kubrick made the decision to not use it and to go with what we call needle drop classical music. But I didn't know at the time, but Alex North, he had this film music for 2001 score that had not been used, great chunks of which found its way, he turned it inside out for my Dragon picture. The movie was not a success at the box office. And after you build up all your hopes and you've worked for a couple of years and you've had so many breakthroughs in terms of what has been achieved, the film got actually a fairly good critical reception, but the audience really did not turn out anywhere near the numbers. And in those days, as now, it's a brutal world, and it was not in theaters very long, and it was very hard for both Hal and me to accommodate the fate of a movie that seemed to have such promise. We had previewed the movie. I think we were in Riverside, California or somewhere like that. George Lucas came and sat next to me for the preview. The preview went really, really well. George turned to me and said, "Oh, you've got a hit." Never forgot that. And I thought, well, he ought to know. I mean, he's George. And so there were a lot of expectations, but they weren't fulfilled. And so emotionally, I really wanted to move on. It was a difficult moment to have put so much effort, and how we had such fun making it. And we had frustrations too, and Sir Ralph had been such a treasure. And, having all that lovely experience, then the movie kind of vanished. And Stephen and George had Raiders 2 weeks in the theaters after us, and Raiders just took off like a rocket. And all the excitement, and I was, we were all in the same kind of class together, and I was happy for them because I loved that movie like everybody else. But wait a second, so emotionally it was tough. And so I moved on and really attacked a lot of other things. I went on, I wrote other movies, and I got to make other movies. And I always was proud of Dragonslayer, but I was unaware of any afterlife of the film. And this was true for a long time.
I want you to destroy the amulet, and me along with it.
Films of that era, using techniques that are today charmingly antique and yet like magic tricks from the old school, are sort of a lost art.
It just stands up there with everything else I've worked on. It delivers. Those dragon shots deliver, and a lot of stuff came together. It's like a cliche, but it did. But it's not an accident, we were all in the same place at the right time, but we knew each other. And we were constantly curious and encouraging to each other and appreciative of the work of each other. And Matthew appreciated everybody. And I think we just were growing as we were doing it. And I'm looking at it from the photographic side, kind of maybe the shot design side, but from the sculpt side and the motion side, same thing was going on there. It's not like these came up in dailies and it was like, oh, that looks good, okay, on to the next one. It wasn't like that at all. It was like, what the hell is this? Look at it. Let's see it again. That's amazing. Wait till people see this.
It's what you shoot for in all of these things, to best yourself and to do something spectacular that nobody has ever seen before. And that was always my motivation and Dennis's motivation. And as a result of this process, you were going to get something new. So that's what you look for.
It's a good film, and I look forward to another couple of years. My grandchildren will be old enough to not be scared to death of it. So I'm proud of the film. I think a lot of people did some very, very lovely work in it. And the fact that I've learned that it means so much to so many people is astonishing and very touching to me. It's a great pleasure for me to run into people who know it so well and treasure it.
I know this dragon, Vermithrax pejorative, 400 years old, vicious, cunning. Oh, those people, I wish they'd never found me.
Why are you going then? You can't possibly make the journey. It's long, it's cold, it's dangerous.
It is oddly appropriate, however.
What is?
This dragon is the last of its kind, like me. When we are gone, half of the powers of the universe vanish with us.
Don't do it then. I'll go.
Nonsense.
No, I can take care of it for you. Please, I'm old enough. I can do the incantations. I've memorized them.
You don't even know the Codex Profundis.
First article. It is the duty of those who hold the power to protect those who are weak-kneed.
Weak and in need.
Weak and in need, weak and in need. And for...
Enough. You don't understand. This is a dragon you want to kill, not a house cat. Let me hear the ritual of banishment.
O serpent? O serpent, because of your offenses most grave and heinous, and because of your...
Monstrosity?
Monstrosity, right. I hereby...
Stop! You make a mockery of it. There is some talent in you, somewhere, but not time enough to find it. I blame myself.
Wait. I won't banish it. I'll burn it. See that candle? Nunc candela flagra. Itero candela incende. Sic impero ego Galen Broadwarden. Adeptus minor. Come on, candle, burn, burn.
Illo casco candela. Welcome to Cragan Moor. I am Ulrich. Which man of you calls himself Valerian?
That would be me. We're here on behalf...
I know why you're here. You're a delegation from Erland, from beyond Lavesha. Let me see the artifacts.
That was a gown. Burned. A bone. Scorched. Scales.
How did you come by these?
I found them at the mouth of the lair.
What else?
A claw.
That is no claw. It's a tooth. And you want me to do battle with that?
Who else can we turn to? We all know what we're dealing with here.
Yes, yes, a basilcock, a cockatrice.
A dragon. Fire and stench. This is no natural creature. This is one of your kind.
Have you tried the Meredith sisters? And what about Rimbod? I've heard it said that he killed a dragon once.
They're all dead. You're the only one left.
It's a long way to Erland.
Twice each year, at the spring and summer equinox, the king selects a new victim. Daughters, sisters,
All women.
girls, virgins, chosen by lot.
A lot of barbarous. And in return, this dragon, it leaves the villages and crops unburned.
Yes.
Your king has made a pact with a monster. Welcome to Cragan Moor. I am Ulrich. Which man of you calls himself Valerian?
That would be me. We're here on behalf...
I know why you're here. You're a delegation from Erland, from beyond Dalvesha. Let me see the artifacts.
That was a gown. Burned. A bone. Scorched. Scales.
How did you come by these?
I found them at the mouth of the lair.
What else?
A claw.
That is no claw. It's a tooth, by the gods. And you want me to do battle with that?
Who else can we turn to? We know what we're dealing with here.
Yes, yes. A basil cock, a cockatrice.
A dragon. Fire and stench. This is no natural creature. This is one of your kind.
Did you try the Meredith sisters? And what about Rinbod? I've heard it said that he killed a dragon once.
They're all dead. You're the only one left.
It's a long way to Erland.
Twice each year at the spring and fall equinox, the king selects a new victim. Daughters. Sisters.
All women.
Girls. Virgins, chosen by lot.
A lottery. Barbarous. And in return, this dragon, it leaves the villages and crops unburned?
Yes.
Your king has made a pact with a monster.
It's a shield. I made it. Might keep the fire off you. Might not.
Thank you.
I've been up there. That thing isn't alone. There's little ones. Young, I think. I don't know how many.
Hatchlings. Well, they'll have to be killed too. Anything else?
You know, you're an idiot. You're going to die tonight. You'll be ripped limb from limb. This is the last time I'll ever speak to you.
That's right.
You're in love, aren't you?
Yes.
It's all right. I understand. She's very beautiful, very brave.
Who is? What do you mean?
Your princess. But I don't care. Listen to me, Galen Bradwarden, sorcerer's apprentice. You're going to be dead. The dragon will be worse than ever. There will be more lotteries. And I'm not a boy anymore.
And you'll be eligible.
Because I'm still a virgin. And I want you to do something about it.
I am in love. But not with a princess.
It's a shield. I made it. It might keep the fire off you and it might not.
Thank you.
I've been up there. That thing isn't alone. There's little ones, young, I think. I don't know how many.
Hatchlings. Well, they'll have to be killed too. Anything else?
You know, you're an idiot. You're going to die tonight. You'll be ripped limb from limb. This is the last time I'll ever speak to you.
That's right.
You're in love, aren't you?
Yes.
It's all right. I understand. She's very beautiful and very brave.
Who is? What do you mean?
Your princess. But I don't care. You listen to me, Galen Bradwarden. Sorcerer's apprentice. You're going to be dead. The dragon will be worse than ever. There will be more lotteries. And I'm not a boy anymore.
And you'll be eligible.
Because I'm still a virgin. And I want you to do something about it.
I am in love. Not with the princess.
It's a shield. I made it. Might keep the fire off you, might not. You know, you're an idiot. You're going to die tonight. You'll be ripped limb from limb. This is the last time I'll ever speak to you.
Thank you.
Another thing. That thing isn't alone up there. There's little ones. Young, I think. I don't know how many.
Hatchlings. They'll have to be killed too. Anything else?
You're in love, aren't you?
Yes.
It's all right. I understand. She's very beautiful, very brave.
Who is? What do you mean?
Your princess. But I don't care. Listen to me, Galen Bradwarden, sorcerer's apprentice. You're going to be dead. The dragon will be worse than ever. There will be more lotteries. And I'm not a boy anymore.
And you'll be eligible because you're...
Because I'm still a virgin. And I want you to do something about it.
I am in love. But not with the princess.
Kotor, Legomnia, Legduo. I have been witness to something. Something of consequence to you.
To me?
There's a great task needing to be done.
No doubt you've heard of our trouble at home.
A dragon, fire and stench. It is evil. Pure and simple.
You want me to do battle with that?
Behold, for I am chosen. I shall die that many may live.
Twice each year, the king selects a new victim. Chosen by lot. Girls, virgins.
Your king's made a pact with a monster.
But your children were dying.
Only a few. Does that sound cruel?
Blacksmith, have you ever forged a weapon?
An edge like no other on this earth.
Dragonslayer. Coming from Paramount Pictures.